Alrighty, so in the last video, we saw a couple ways to manipulate this. For example, we saw using aliasing out the this variable into a local variable and then using scoping in order to access that previous variable. We saw that. We also saw the for each method the for each method on arrays has a special overload that allows us to change the value of this, but there are circumstances where you need to be able to modify the value of this of a function without having either of those two things be a possibility. And so there's going to be a handful of ways of doing this. Three, actually. There's going to be three ways to fix this. And that is going to be something that a lot of people really get tripped up on. And hopefully the previous two videos sort of started to give you guys an idea of how limited the this keyword can be, because it's always dependent on what we have on the left-hand side. Of course, that's not necessarily true. Of course, if I didn't have the second argument in here, you might, of course, think, okay, well, why is this variable not, this log function, why is it not being brought into, or being attached to this object? I'm using the dot notation. Well, the dot notation only will work if you use, if you're actually invoking that method. So console.log whoa will bind console.log or log to the console object, whereas var ble equals console.log will just extract the log function and completely forget about the console object. So what we're going to see in this video are examples of call, apply, and bind. Now, you really need to understand these functions and what they do. They change the behavior of this. All right, let's talk about their differences. So let's say we have a object, var person. I know, super inspired example, isn't it? Var person name equals Nelson. And he has a print name function. Print name does console log this.name. So now, what is the this pointing to? Think about that for a second. What is the this pointing to here? Well, it's actually a trick question because we don't know. It really depends on how this function is called. Because remember, if I do var print name equals, or var, I don't know, I don't want to reuse the same name because I don't want you to think that it has to be the same name. It could be anything, like ble equals person.print name. We're extracting out that, and now we're invoking it, and we get undefined. Well, we don't get... I'll do first name. We're not getting undefined because there is a property called name on the window object. That's why we're getting an empty string. So let's just change name to first name so that when I show this example, we get undefined because there's no property called first name on the window object. So what if we really wanted to alias this function out and apply it or call it against any arbitrary object? So for example, we might, I'll remove that. We might have a person2. First name foo. I want to, without repeating this function, I want to call this function on this object. How would we do that? Well, we can't do person2.ble because person2 doesn't have a ble property. We get a type error. Person2.ble is not a function. It's undefined. We could steal it right here. Ble is person.print name. That would work. But what if we can't do that? What if we don't want to modify the object person2, but we wanted to invoke this print name function, which has been aliased to the ble variable? What if we wanted to invoke that on this object? Well, we could use either call or apply. And I want to demonstrate the differences, because call and apply actually do practically the same thing. And I will not blame you if you get these two functions mixed up. In fact, if you're in an interview situation, your interviewer is doubtful to blame you for getting these two functions get mixed up. Spoiler alert: I get them mixed up all the time because they do something very similar. To show you guys what they do, let's just go ahead and show you guys call. So call, what I can do is I can do ble.call. So that, that's kind of weird, right? I'm invoking a method on a function, or I'm invoking a function on a function. And that's right, like I said in a couple videos ago, functions have functions on them. They are objects, right? Not only do they have data attached to them, such as their different properties, they also have functions on them, and call is one of those functions that's available on functions. In fact, call you can call as a function, so it has a call function. Call is a function that has a call function. You could do this all day, and it'll still work. It probably won't do what you expect it to, but my point is that unlike many other languages, functions in JavaScript do have functions on them. So what does call do? Well, call, if we look at the signature, it says it wants a this arg, which is a required thing, and then it wants arguments. So let's go ahead and do ble.call person2. Hit save. Boom. We've just overridden the this value. We've manually changed it without doing anything crazy. We've done ble.call person2. And what that did is that called this function, but used this object as the this. So I know this is looking really weird here. Clearly print name is being defined on this object. That this should obviously point to this.firstName. But again, just remember, unlike static scoping of our variables, this is determined by how you call the function. We extract the function out, and then we call it with person2. I could have even done person.printName.call person2 if I wanted to. And as you see, we both get the same result. I'm taking this function and I'm changing this parameter. And by parameter, I mean bound content. All right, so that's call, but we haven't talked about parameters yet. Because when you call a function, you generally need to pass in parameters. So let's go ahead and do another example. I'm going to go ahead and comment this out, bring this down here. Let's do another one. 7. There's a function called math.max, and it's a great illustration of the difference between call and apply. I know I haven't defined the difference between them yet, but we'll see it in a second. So I'm going to say var max equals math.max. Okay, and interesting thing about max is the max function doesn't need a this, and we do max and we pass in an arbitrary number of parameters to max. So we'll console log this, and it'll return the maximum number out of the list passed in. Now what's interesting here is notice that I am invoking max without binding it to a context. And that's because the math.max function doesn't rely on the this parameter. It doesn't care where it's being executed from. So we don't need to change the this parameter. We know how to change the this parameter by using call, and let's go ahead and see how we deal with parameters with call. Let's call max with call. I'm going to do max.call, and then I'm going to pass in null as the this parameter. And for max, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to specify. So we'll do console log max call with null. So I'm doing something max. I'm doing something interesting here. I'm invoking this max function using the call function using a variable list of arguments. So this looks the call function is very similar to the way that we would normally invoke a function, right? It looks very, very similar. But let's look at apply. So console log max.apply. So apply and call do the exact same thing and have a very similar signature. The first parameter is this, and we'll pass in null here. But the second parameter is interesting because it's an array. It's going to be an array of arguments passed in. So apply, as you'll see right here in the signature, only accepts 2 parameters. And now we hit Control S, and it worked. So the difference between call and apply, they both do the exact same thing. They both accepted this arg that changes the this variable when we invoke that function, but they accept parameters in a different way. Call accepts it as a variable list of additional parameters, whereas apply only accepts 2 parameters, the second one being an array of arguments. And we can see that even with functions. So let's do another person. And let's say name is Nelson, and say print name. I don't know what I was thinking there, why there was a function there. I shouldn't have done that. Print name, let's do, I don't know, department, comma, prefix. Let's do prefix first because That would make more sense. And then we'll do console log this, prefix plus comma plus department plus colon space plus this dot name, right? And we can invoke person.printName if we want to, and we invoke it, and we have undefined Nelson, because I didn't pass any parameters. Derp. Prefix, how about Mr. Department, how about IT? All right, so we have Mr. IT Nelson. So very, very standard. We have a function with arguments. But I have a challenge for you guys. Let's say we have a var person2 with a name of foobar. And let's say we want to invoke print name on person2. So I'll do var, I don't know, my local print name equals person.printName. I'm just extracting that out for readability's sake. I want to invoke my local print name on person2. So think about how we would do that with both call and apply and what the difference is. So if we think about it, we can do my local print name dot call on person2 and then pass in I don't know, Mrs. Accounting. And as you see, we get that called by passing in these two parameters as additional parameters to call. But if we wanted to use apply, my local print name dot apply, we would do person2, and then we would do an array of parameters. And we get this exact same behavior. So again, the difference between call and apply is that call accepts its additional parameters as a variable list of arguments, whereas apply accepts its additional parameters as simply an array. And why is that important? Well, I want to come back to the max example. Let's say that we have an array that could be any size, my any size array, but we're going to cheat here because I'm just going to arbitrarily put some stuff in here. And what I want you to figure out, what I want you to do, is figure out how to, in one line of code, print the maximum number of this array. Think about it for a second. Remember, the max function takes in a list of variable arguments. I can't do console log math.max my any size array. I can't do that because we get not a number, because we passed in an array into something that expected something different, right? So how would we solve this in one line of code? How would we solve this elegantly? Well, the answer would be to use apply. So what I can do is I can do math.max.apply, pass in null for the this arg, and pass in my any size array as the second. Boom. One line of code, it found the maximum number of an array. And why does this work? Well, it works because the apply function will take an array of arguments and think of it like expanding or exploding these arguments into the arguments expected by a function that accepts multiple arguments. I know I just said arguments a lot there, but bear with me here. So the apply will take this array and kind of pass in each one of these items in the array individually as arguments into that actual function. All right, so I know this seems very, this might seem kind of academic. Call and apply are generally used in more abstract sort of metaprogramming sort of things. They're not as popular as the bind function. Bind function is incredibly important, and in fact, I don't know, what order should I do this in? Should I show you guys the bind function first, or have you implement it first? Because with everything that we've covered in this series, you can write the bind function. Well, I'll go ahead and show you how it works first, because then you'll know why the bind function is so incredibly powerful. So remember, if I do var log equals console.log log hello, we're going to get an error, remember? But what I can do is I can actually, without calling console log, because I can do log.call console hello. I can certainly do that. That'll work. But I don't want to do this every single time I call. I want, or every single time I call log, I want the log function, the variable called log that's pointing to the console log function. I want it to be bound in chains to the console object. I want that console object to go wherever that log variable goes. And what we do is we use the bind function. So let's go ahead and do log hello. So again, this is going to fail because we're invoking log and we're not invoking it with the right execution context. But if I use bind, simply do dot bind, and then I pass in console. Boom. Now it works. So what I've done is I've created a whole new function. A function that ignores wherever this method is being called from and always invokes it in the context of the variable I passed in here. And we could use this to fix up a couple of other examples. So remember how I have var person equals, name is, or first name is Nelson, print name. Let's just do alert this dot first name. And then if I did, remember our button variable that's all the way at the top that I'd never commented out? So that button is a reference to that button right there. So I'm going to keep that there. Button add event listener. Remember, if we do person dot print name, this isn't going to work. It's going to alert undefined. How do we fix this? Well, the answer is right there with bind. We want to ignore whatever context this callback is going to be invoked from within button. Completely ignore it. And make it so that person object is always carried around. So I'm going to do dot bind person. Hit Control S. Hit press me, and now it says Nelson. Now, the reason why this is so important, the reason why bind's so important might come if you're still kind of struggling with the concept here. I have another potential example here. Function do or call the callback. And I'll simply call the callback, and then I'll do call the callback on person.printName. So if I do that, notice how undefined gets alerted out. I'm going to change that to console log because that alert dialog is really ignoring me. And we get undefined printed out because when we say call the callback and we do person.printName, this reference to this function is being kind of condensed into this variable right here. And remember, what determines the this of the function is always determined by what's on the left hand of the dot, not when you reference the function, but when you invoke the function. When is the function invocation happening here? It's happening inside here. And where's the dot? There is no dot. What does that mean? It means it's going to execute it under whatever global context there is. Or undefined if we're in strict mode. And of course, to fix that, we do dot bind person. And now we get Nelson. All right, I'm going to wrap this video up here, actually. I have an interesting exercise that I want people to kind of work out, and we'll do that in the next video, and I'll talk about it, and I'll show you guys the solution, obviously, at some point. And there's a little bit more about bind I want to discuss as well, so we'll see you guys then.